Well, one of the things I wondered with the primary was why nobody was hitting Doden. I mean, especially if it's as tight as it certainly could be, it's going to be hard because he's going to hit Roden. So it's going to be hard for me that somebody doesn't have something or won't find something stronger than we saw against Doden in the primary in this runoff, and that he's going to get hit harder and more often.
We're back with another episode of the Searchlight Report, a podcast from South Dakota Searchlight that brings you up to date on policy and politics in the Mount Rushmore state. I'm your host, Meghan O'Brien. South Dakota Republicans are days away from choosing their nominee for governor in the first ever statewide runoff election. None of the four candidates pulled off the 35% of votes needed to win June's primary election outright. You just heard from Kevin Worcester, a longtime South Dakota journalist who's written columns for Searchlight and has reported in newsrooms across the state, including the Brookings Register, Sioux Falls Argus Leader, Rapid City Journal, Kello TV, and South Dakota Public Broadcasting. I spoke with him after the June 2nd primary election to learn more about the results from that day and what they could mean for Tuesday's runoff election. The two remaining candidates are current Governor Larry Roden and businessman Toby Doden. Just this week, Roden's campaign released an ad using public record and Doden's own comments to criticize Doden's voting record.
According to public records, Doden didn't cast a Republican primary vote until 2024. Even worse, Doden voted for Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
I think I may have either voted for Barack Obama.
If Toby Doden voted for Obama, how can we trust him as governor?
Doden since said that he didn't vote for former President Barack Obama, and at a recent campaign stop said he's voted for current President Donald Trump 3 times. The back-and-forth criticisms are the newest in a race defined by issues including tax policy, prison reform, and political experience. But how did we get here? For this week's episode of Searchlight Report, we'll go back through the campaigns of 4 Republicans to see how 2 of them, who weren't initially seen as frontrunners, ended up being the last 2 candidates standing. In April 2025, State Speaker of the House John Hanson was the first to announce his campaign. Hanson said then that he'd defend property rights against eminent domain claims to build carbon pipelines, stop giving incentives to large corporations, and cut government spending.
I mean, we are conservative Republicans. I'm a conservative Republican. And so I want to conserve those things that make South Dakota great. And for me, that's faith, and that's family, and that's freedom. And that will always be my focus.
He's served 11 total years in the State House of Representatives. Hanson is also a co-founder of the anti-abortion group Life Defense Fund, which led a campaign against constitutional amendment that would have restored abortion rights in the state. A little more than a month after Hanson announced his campaign, Toby Doden announced his. He promised then to eliminate property taxes. Doden reiterated that promise during a past interview with Searchlight Report.
I think phasing out and eliminating property tax is going to be something that the folks talk about in the state 100 years from now. I'm going to be the first one here to get it done.
State lawmakers spent months in Pierre this past winter working to push through solutions to the rising property tax problem, and those actions would become a major issue in the campaign for governor. Property taxes raise about $2 billion in revenue, and all of that money goes to local governments. None of it goes to the state government. After Doden's announcement, U.S. Representative Dusty Johnson entered the race. He told supporters then that it's time for a new chapter. Unlike Doden, Johnson's not a political newcomer, having previously served under former governors Mike Rounds and Dennis Dugard, and as an elected Public Utilities Commissioner. He also previously worked as an executive at Vantage Point Solutions, a telecommunications engineering and consulting firm. He's currently finishing out his 4th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. Johnson spoke about aligning South Dakota with Trump's vision for the, quote, golden age of America. As his campaign moved forward, he became focused on creating what he called a business-friendly environment in South Dakota, including a framework for data centers looking to do business in the state.
What we know is that there's a lot of misinformation around data centers. Clearly, you can have projects that are poorly done. Not every corner is the right corner for a data center in the right way, that not every corner is the right corner for a cemetery or a convenience store, right? I mean, we have to do these things in the right way.
Current Governor Larry Roden was the last to throw his hat in the ring. He took over as governor last year after his predecessor, Kristi Noem, left to lead the National Department of Homeland Security. Before serving as lieutenant governor, Roden served 16 years in the state legislature, including leadership positions such as House Majority Leader. He told supporters at his campaign announcement that, quote, good policy makes good politics. As governor, he's made many major policy moves. He signed laws using revenue from sales tax increases to reduce homeowner property taxes, a law that bans the use of eminent domain to get land access for carbon capture pipelines, and a law to fund the construction of a $650 million men's prison in Sioux Falls. About half of the existing inmates in South Dakota end up returning to prison within 3 years of release. Calls for reform have played a major role in the race.
Because we owe it to society, we owe it to humanity to provide these inmates an opportunity to get a job when they're out of prison and start their lives over and be productive members of society. And that's what we'll do, work toward, especially when we get the new prison up and running.
By the end of 2025, the stage was set for a 4-candidate race for the Republican nomination for governor.
Hi, I'm Seth Tupper, editor at South Dakota Searchlight. If you want to know more about what questions will be on the ballot or keep up with the candidates for state and federal elections, we've got the coverage you'll need this election season. Our reach goes from East River to West River with journalists in Sioux Falls, Pierre, and Rapid City. You can check out our election coverage on our website, southdakotasearchlight.com, and subscribe to our free newsletter at southdakotasearchlight.com/subscribe.
Hansen, Doden, Johnson, and Roden hit the campaign trail through the early months of this year. 3 debates asked candidates to explain their positions on property tax policy, criminal justice reform, public safety, data centers, and economic development. Roden and Hansen caught criticism for the property tax relief plans they passed into law, which relied on higher sales taxes to reduce homeowner property taxes. Doden, in his first run for elected office, labeled his opponents, quote, career politicians. Previous votes in Congress from Johnson made some question his support of President Trump. Johnson led in the first several polls. By April, he was far ahead in polling, with nearly enough support to win and avoid a runoff. Those numbers came from a survey by Mason-Dixon Polling, commissioned by South Dakota Newswatch and the Cheeseman Center for Democracy. By late May, in a Kelloland-commissioned Emerson polling survey, Doden took his first lead at 26%. Followed by Johnson at 23%. The gap between the two fell within the poll's margin of error at 3.2 percentage points. Johnson fell to third place during June's primary election, getting 23% of the vote. I asked Worcester how that happened.
Well, I touched on this in something I wrote for you guys at Searchlight. I think he had bad ads. I just don't think he could ever find an advertisement, a TV advertisement that presented him in a very effective way. He just didn't show very well in those ads, which seemed awkward and kind of stilted, and you know, he's a good public speaker when he gets out and about, and I think he was caught in a bad spot, kind of between Trump and not being with Trump, which I'd say, I think his natural inclination obviously is to not be a big Trumper, and in a primary election, the votes that he had taken that were seen as going against Trump showed up in some of the attack ads, and they were probably had an impact, and just a lot of things went wrong with, and usually you have to blame the candidate. You have to blame the candidate and how he manages the campaign and the people that work on his campaign. So I assume he's doing some soul searching now about what went wrong. And sometimes somebody that's perceived as the front runner early on, you know, that's a long time to hold that. And you can get kind of tense because you've started to assume that you're probably going to finish first. And then when you feel it slipping away, as perhaps he was starting to see some polling numbers in their internal polls that indicated that. I don't know that, but you have to wonder about that. You can kind of tense up, and he was throwing a lot of ads out there, and I'm not sure they were doing much good.
Doden received 31% of the Republican vote in June. Roden came in second with 25%, and Hansen finished fourth with 21%. Pat Powers has written the South Dakota War College political blog from a Republican perspective for more than 20 years. He and I spoke after the primary election in June about what he called the fatal error in the race. Yeah, were you expecting to see Doden's numbers get that high?
Well, I don't know that anybody did, because he's a new quantity in the he's new and really has no experience running before. But I think the fatal error in the race was that everybody underestimated his performance, and they never really went after him with any criticism. And if you think about it in that way, it's a lot like the what people talk about in comparison, the Rounds Kirby Barnett race for governor, where Kirby and Barnett went after each other, but they left Mike alone. And then on election day, Mike took the win. And so with Toby Doden, just like Mike Rounds, the attacks didn't happen to Toby, so he kind of benefited from the hall pass. And I know some of the strategy out there for some of the candidates is they kind of thought Toby was the person they wanted to be in the runoff against. So you didn't see any commercials poking at him while everybody else was busy going after each other. And Doden took his shots. He leveled attacks at them. The jailhouse John Hansen week on crime attack that came out of Toby Doden's camp. And he had other attacks on Dusty and Larry Roden. Dusty had outside groups coming in, and he was kind of stung by votes he's managed to get a pass on from voters before, such as his vote for the January 6th investigation and a vote to reject what was a kind of an atypical funding mechanism for the border wall. It was just kind of outside what was normally done, and they didn't think it was necessarily constitutional. So, he rejected that funding, but voted for it every other time. Now, keep in mind, since these things he was getting hit with, Trump had endorsed Dusty for Congress since those votes. So obviously there was no problem with it, but the outside group, they used those to great effect to drive Dusty's numbers down. And so everybody is out there being defined, the hits against Roden, the hits against John Hansen, the hits against Dusty, they were being defined. So, and at the same time, nobody was defining Toby. So he had complete autonomy to define himself. And, his commercials were effective in doing so. I mean, they might have been very practice and rote, and the commercials didn't deviate from any other speech he's given, but, he got them to sink in, and nobody was taking the bark off him. So you've got a situation where he's got full autonomy, and it showed. I mean, he won.
None of the candidates reached the threshold for a decades-old state law, which requires the winner of a primary election to secure 35% of the vote. Doden criticized the runoff rule in a video published on YouTube less than a week after the primary election.
We should just cancel the 35% rule and just award me the winner. Yeah, such a silly rule anyway. They put this in back in the 80s. I don't know who did it, but whoever did it should be discredited. It's ridiculous. You ask the people to vote. Whoever gets the most votes wins.
Former state lawmaker Joe Barnett sponsored the 1985 legislation before he died that year. Barnett served nearly 2 decades in the state legislature as a Republican representing the same district Doden calls home. The law requires a runoff 8 weeks after the primary election, leaving Doden and Roden to continue campaigning. The runoff election is only open to Republicans. During the 3 months before the primary election, the Republican Party gained more than 4,000 voters, and between last month's primary and the registration deadline for this election, an additional 5,700 voters joined the Republican Party. More than half of the state's registered voters are Republicans. Some of those registrations are people who are coming of age to vote or moving to the state, but some are coming from people who switched party registrations to participate in the runoff election. The registration deadline for Tuesday's election has passed. Polls are open Tuesday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. local time. The winner of the runoff will be on the November ballot against Democratic nominee Dan Allers. To learn more about the candidates, check out a profile on Doden by reporter Joshua Heyer and a profile about Roden by reporter Mackenzie Huber, now available on SouthDakotaSearchlight.com. South Dakota Searchlight's voter guide is accessible on the website's homepage, where you can find more information about the two candidates. Also, check out past episodes of Searchlight Report featuring one-on-one interviews with Doden and Roden. That's all we have for this episode of Searchlight Report. Audio for this episode of the podcast came from recordings by South Dakota Searchlight, Roden for Governor on YouTube, Keloland Media Group's Republican gubernatorial debate, and After the Call on YouTube. The podcast is based on reporting by South Dakota Searchlight staff, editor Seth Tupper, senior reporter John Holt, and reporters Joshua Heyer, Mackenzie Huber, and me. I write the scripts and produce the audio with editing by Seth Tupper. South Dakota Searchlight is part of States Newsroom, the nation's largest nonprofit news organization. Until next time, I'm South Dakota Searchlight's Meghan O'Brien with the Searchlight Report.